What's the most idiotic rule you've ever been expected to abide by? Story 1. In my sophomore year of high school, our old principal got a promotion to the district office. He was replaced by someone who had literally just moved to the area and knew next to nothing of the well established culture of our small town. So, after a few weeks, he noticed a quote unquote problem around the campus. He saw many people wearing purple and gold in copious amounts and in ridiculous ways every Friday, and he was sure it had to be related to gang involvement. Rather than ask anyone about it, he called an emergency assembly in which he lectured us all about the seriousness of this issue. He informed us that from that point on, if anyone were to wear either of these colors at school, they would be put in detention for the remainder of the day and their parent or guardian would have to come to pick them up. People laughed and rebelled, wearing more purple and gold on more days, and the detention room was overflowing almost every day. 2 months later, he found out that purple and gold were our school colors. People were dressing up like that on Fridays to show support and pride for whatever sports team had a game that day, as was the tradition of our town for the past 60 years or so. To show how stupid he felt, he called another emergency assembly, but this time to apologize, to which he wore a purple and gold clown suit and a dunce cap. Good stuff. Story 2. I went to a Catholic school from 1st to 8th grade, so you can imagine just how many absolutely ridiculous rules we had to follow. But I think the worst was when we got a male principal, and he made a rule that we were no longer allowed to wear shorts under our skirts. At the time, I was only upset about it because it made no sense to me, since no one could even see the shorts, but once I got older, I realized just how sick it was. Story 3. I was on vacation with my girlfriend at the time, and her dad had a no peeing standing up rule. Literally, I was not allowed to piss standing up in his house. He said this to me at the beginning of the vacation, and I thought he meant to make sure the toilet seat was down after I used it, since he only had daughters and wanted to protect them or something. So one time, when I was peeing standing up, as any man would, my girlfriend's mom says from outside the door that she can hear someone peeing while standing up. Still taking this as a joke, I admitted that it was me. I then got a 30-minute lecture on how I should obey his rules and not piss standing up. Still one of my biggest moments in a relationship. I was 21 at the time this happened. I was never given the true reason for this rule. He just said something about protecting his daughters, maybe not wanting to hear a man peeing or something. I wasn't really paying attention during his lecture, so most of it went over my head. I listened to him lecture me because he was a military man. My girlfriend's parents already hated everything I did, and I didn't want to cause any more problems. Story 4. I wasn't allowed to watch PG-13 or higher movies, or books, comics, games, etc. until I moved out of my parents' house at age 19. Additionally, I wasn't allowed to have my computer in my room. Not entirely unreasonable, but the weird thing about that is it kept being true after I got married and was just visiting. Story 5. At my high school, when someone was late, they would just have the teacher mark tardy on their computer. Now, most students were never more than a minute late. They just couldn't get to class fast enough and would walk in 30 seconds late or so. Our principal had the brilliant idea of instead having a tardy table all the way across the school where students would go, line up, and register as being tardy. If you were late to class, the teacher would send you to the tardy table instead of just marking you late themselves. Instead of having a teacher mark the 1 or 2 people who showed up tardy to their class, you had late students from all classes lining up to register as tardy with only one person to process them at the tardy table. The result was students ended up 15 to 30 minutes late to class because they were waiting in line to register as tardy. The parents weren't pleased, but the principal insisted that it would reduce the number of students who were late overall. Now, I'm not sure if they kept it or not. The tardy table was started just a few months before I quit school. Public schools always have the dumbest rules, though. Make a gun with your index finger and thumb, and it's zero tolerance. But bully the kid, and meh, whatever? Ugh, come on. Story 6. I worked in daycare. We had classroom ratios, say 1 teacher must be in the room for every 5 children in there. My new boss wanted us to call her when we needed to go to the bathroom and wait for her to come and cover us for the time it took us to go pee. Okay, so this doesn't sound so bad, except we would call her and then she'd tell us to hold it, or she'd say that she was busy with something and would be there in a second, and then half an hour later when we're slinking down the hall to the bathroom, she'd yell at us for being in the hall. She also wrote me up for being too loud. In a daycare, I was singing songs to infants during circle time, and they were all sitting quietly and clapping. She was crazy. Story 7. My high school's cafeteria was too small to legally hold all of the students, for fire code reasons. For this reason, I would eat lunch in the band room. Now, in my senior year, they cracked down on this. The principal called an assembly and announced that all students would be required to spend the lunch period in the cafeteria. At this point, I stood up and said, "Do you realize that that would require exceeding the legal capacity of the cafeteria, breaking the law, and putting students' safety at risk?" The principal responded with, "Well, sometimes you have to make do with what you have." Story 8. I went to a semi-boarding high school. About 10% of students boarded, and new dorms were constructed while I was there. We had a big meeting, and the principal said, "No students of the opposite sex in your dorm room. We don't want anyone having sex." That's a bit paraphrased. One of the students stood up and said, "What about the gay kids? They get to have sex." So for about a month, the rule was no students of the opposite or same sex in your dorm room with the exception of your roommate. Story 9. I once took a part-time job from a temp agency at a Toys R Us distribution warehouse where my job was to cut open boxes, place them all on a pallet, and put the pallet in the bottom of the stacks, like large shelves. We were all just extra people they needed for the extra Christmas workload. Met all kinds of interesting people, including an elderly husband and wife who were farmers trying to make ends meet. Well, anyway, the one person in charge of us was an absolute She was a permanent Toys R Us employee. We were treated like and oftentimes we didn't have any boxes to cut open and were made to stand still at our tables. Large but low metal tables with 4 people to stand around and then just do nothing. If we moved around or heaven forbid we sat down on the table, we were screamed at. I guess they thought if we were going to be paid for doing nothing, that we should suffer for it. Standing in one spot for up to 4 hours straight would absolutely my back. Now, I've run into a lot of jobs where the rules seem to be just made to punish employees. Oftentimes, it's because of what some bad employees did in the past, and now all future employees have to pay for it. Story 10. When I was in high school, there was a rule that students were not allowed to grow facial hair in any form. And if a student tried to grow facial hair or just plain didn't have the time to shave before getting to class, which started at 7 a.m., he was sent to the disciplinary office, scolded by the vice principal, and forced to shave with a single-bladed disposable razor and no shaving cream. Many of my friends faced this very same punishment, and I asked several teachers why this rule was in effect. Most of them simply stated that they just didn't know. I got one answer out of the dozen teachers I asked, and that was, "It's so that the students don't look like they're older and get mistaken as faculty. This would allow them to roam the halls and not get sent back to class." To which I could only respond, "Why don't you just learn what your coworkers look like?" The football coach was not happy with me after that. Story 11. Let's see. I worked a ton of overtime because I was the last person on my team who hadn't quit because my manager was such an imbecile and a bitch. So I was stuck doing the work of an entire team, working late into the night, often past midnight and over many weekends. Then she decides that I don't get any, not even 15 minutes of flex time. So if I have to miss 15 minutes of work, I have to report it and then get docked. Then she decides if I'm 5 minutes late to work, I have to report it and it will show negatively on my performance review. So yeah, I don't work at McDonald's. I work as a software analyst for a major university, and I've never been treated so poorly in my life. So I quit and moved to a different department where we can pretty much come and go as we please, so long as the work gets done. Still put in loads of overtime, but am more than happy to now. Story 12. I was in Katamavik, which is a Canadian program that is basically a government-sanctioned cult where youths of 17 to 22 years old get to travel to 3 places in Canada doing volunteer work. They cover your transportation, housing, and activities, and you get a quote-unquote allowance of $3 a day. Now, it sounds great if you want to travel and have no savings, except they have some bizarre rules which make it sort of like a hippie-ish commune where everyone is supposed to love everyone else equally. You are not allowed to have close friends or partners at all. So here we were, a bunch of 17 to 22-year-olds stuck in rural Manitoba in minus 45-degree winter weather with no TV or recreation at the house except lots and lots of snow. Oh yeah, and cows. What do you think happened? Out of 11 people, 8 of them hooked up. We had to meet each other in secret because we would get disciplined if it was found out. On our quote-unquote weekend off, a bunch of us decided to get hotel rooms and gasp, couples shared rooms together. Our group leader disciplined us and gave us strikes. I already had 2 strikes for insignificant things, so I was told to leave the program. I was also disciplined because I spent too much time hanging out with a female friend instead of like 6 people at once singing in a circle like they wanted us to do. It was a pretty bizarre social experiment, kind of like Big Brother, except nobody wins. Story 13. So, for a long time at our school, our local fire marshal has come in unannounced to check and see if we're up to fire code and safety standards and whatnot. This is fine and all, except they're crazy strict about it. Like, we can get a $500 fine for a book bag leaned up against a wall in a hallway because it could, quote, impede an emergency escape or something. The administration frequently threatens to put these fines on whoever's book bag it is, but nobody takes that seriously and they've never done it. So it's a stupid rule, but it doesn't really bother the students other than the principal. Starting at the beginning of this year, the math department, which is notorious for being a clique and always trying to pass stupid rules through the administration, decided we weren't allowed to bring our book bags to their classes anymore. Their reasoning behind that was we might trip on them, to which I thought, well, you're seemingly competent women and no other teacher I've ever known has had this rule. Why don't you ask if one of your fellow faculty members how they miraculously avoid the book bags? But I never actually said this. They told us to leave them in our lockers, to which we responded that they don't fit and that going to our lockers would make us late to class. Our lockers are a long way from the math department, and that's why we just carry all of our books in our book bags. To which they basically responded, tough shit. So we started leaving them against the walls in the halls outside the classrooms. Cue a surprise fire marshal inspection while 5 math classes are going on. From what I've gathered from non-math teachers I've asked, our school got fined somewhere around $5,000 to $10,000. The day after we got that fine, there was a meeting with the administration and the math department. I was signing out to go to a doctor's appointment when they came out of the office looking whiter than snow. When our teacher announced that rule being revoked in our calculus class, there was a standing ovation. Taught me a good lesson that as power increases, stupidity stays the same. Story 14. During my junior year of high school, we had an assistant principal come into my math class to lecture the students on their behavior. I'll admit that the class did have some behavioral issues, but I and a handful of others weren't being problematic students. The assistant principal asks everyone in the room to sign a piece of paper with a list of new rules that this class will be enforcing, with a great many of these rules being pretty ridiculous, and then threatening suspension for any rule violators. A few that I can still recall are no leaving your seat under any circumstances without permission, no turning your head or breaking eye contact with the teacher, no talking to another student at any time without permission, absolutely no speaking out in class without permission. The entire time the assistant principal is reading this list, I can't help but feel like I'm being unfairly punished because of the conduct problems of others. It felt to me like I was being drilled by a staff sergeant for something that I didn't do, forced to follow a ridiculously strict set of rules. Even though I really wanted to criticize this new regimen, I continued to hold my tongue. Finally, the AP asks if anyone in the class disagrees with the new rules or feels as if they are overly harsh. And my hand shoots straight up into the air and I'm called on the assistant principal. I dramatically clear my throat and proceed to say, please, Mrs. Hatz, tell me if I'm reading all of this correctly. So, in the event that I needed to borrow a pencil from another student, I would first have to raise my hand to get the teacher's attention, then ask the teacher for permission to turn my head and speak with another student, and again, that student would have to raise his hand and ask for permission to turn his head. Next, I would have to ask that student for permission to borrow his pencil. And after, I would have to raise my hand and ask for the teacher's permission to sharpen said pencil. Does that sound about right to you? The class, which had earlier been pretty somber, burst into laughter, and I'm told to immediately report to the principal's office for my statement, and I'm later suspended for 2 days because of it for undermining authority. Story 15. I went through basic training and advanced training in the Army, and it was like being in a cage full of not a single damn person knew how to think for themselves. The ones who were allowed to a bit would do stupid shit like making us rake lines in the sand so that it looked nice in the rain. What the actual Another one. Wake up at 4:30 a.m., be outside and be ready to march at 5. Roll call, then exercise field at 5:30 sharp. Must do quote-unquote standard physical training. Look up Army SPT and see how that is. It doesn't help at all. Not allowed to take soldiers running for 2 miles. 1 mile and 3 miles is okay, but not 2 miles because that's how long the physical test is for. Not allowed to do 2-minute push-ups and sit-ups for the same reason. 1 minute is okay though, as is 3 minutes. 2 minutes is not okay. Anyways, I digress. That's not the stupid part. 6:30 we're done with PT. The march towards the dining hall, get there at 7 despite it being 5 minutes away. At 7:30 we're required to be outside, showered with the room clean in our day's uniform and ready to go to training or daily duty. Regardless of if you want breakfast or not, or if you want to eat some fruits or whatever, everyone must stand in the hot food line with a tray. If you are at the end of the line, you will not shower, shave, or clean your room. You will be lucky to get outside with your boots on. So this inevitably means you will be destroyed by superiors for the rest of the week. Another stupid rule: fail PT test running because it's 17 degrees in January and you haven't run all Christmas break. You passed push-ups and sit-ups. For remedial training right after dinner, they make you do only push-ups and sit-ups. Can't run, won't take you to the track. If you run sprints on concrete, get shin splints, and are told you aren't allowed to run or jog for 4 months. End result, perpetually fail PT test. I could go on, but I won't. Thank God I got out. Story 16. This will get lost in the shuffle, and it's far from the stupidest rule mentioned here, but maybe I just want to vent. Up until a couple of weeks ago at work, it was the general policy for the floor associates where I worked to have to stay over past our scheduled end of shift until all the work was done. They'd been understaffing us, so of course nothing ever got done the way it was supposed to in the course of an ordinary shift. Meanwhile, since the cashiers are on some different shift scheduling system that is more closely monitored by the home office or something, they had got to leave right when they were scheduled to leave at a closing time, instead of being able to come out and help on the floor to get the work done quickly and efficiently. Alright, cool, whatever. I and all the other closing floor associates got a few more hours than we were scheduled every week, and the work got done one way or another. Well, guess what? It's nearing the end of our fiscal year, and for some reason we're over budget on the payroll. So now we must leave at our scheduled end of shift regardless of what still needs to be done. And they have fewer people working each shift, and everyone's weekly hours have been cut significantly. During the holidays, too, at a fairly major retail chain. And they're cracking down on a bunch of other shit that ultimately results in nothing getting done. It just feels like we're getting the shaft for something that wasn't even our fault to begin with. Meanwhile, the managers and corporate folks whose fault it actually was are making exactly zero sacrifices. Story 17. Well, everything my old boss ever let come out of his mouth. We took out the brushes from the sink and threw away the sponges because when you use them, you shock the glasses and that's why they break later. What the f are you doing? Don't pull the beer tap all the way forward, you're wasting beer. He also shined a flashlight on our faces to get our attention and used to point our mouths to what he wanted us to do, with the light in our faces. He forgot to take taxes out and blamed it on us as if we had something to do with payroll, yet he wouldn't even let us count our own tips. Took me in the back and screamed at me because I have GAD, which causes tics, and one of them is yawning. Made me sing on the karaoke nights because, quote, when people go to a bar, they expect that shit. I would never go to a bar where the staff didn't sing karaoke. You don't need a small staff shirt, just tuck that one in. I had a large and wore jeans. I'm a small guy. I looked like a toddler who didn't even know how to dress. I sniffed one time and he sent me home for 4 days. Retroactively lowered my pay. When I questioned him about lowering my pay, he just laughed and said, yeah, you get tips. Find me another job where you even get to have a paycheck and tips, much less get to keep them both. This stupid had only been in bars to run his karaoke show, made some money in radio, and thought he was Duke Ellington. Yes, I quit. Story 18. In 2nd grade, I was told by the then principal that I had to come to her office after every school day and do 10 push-ups for her. Missed the bus every day because of that. In 8th grade, I was told by the principal I wasn't allowed to talk to anyone during recess because your voice is annoying to me. In 5th grade, we were arm wrestling at the lunch table and ended up in what was called the quiet room during recess and had to write, I will not hit people 500 times. Current job. Monday to Friday, we have different managers we can talk to. We don't know who is our Monday manager until Monday morning. This is to increase productivity, but it just creates a lot of confusion. And finally, at my grandma's, don't do that me. Why? Because I said so. Let's not forget anything that happened in church. Ever. What's the best way you've seen someone rebel against school rules? Story 1. Jerk teachers like this are the worst. So we had a substitute one day in 7th grade English, and she had us make decorative name tags so she knew how to address us. She asked us to write one phrase that described us under our names. For example, horse girl or health nut. One boy on the lacrosse team wrote lax bro. She asked him if that was a swear. He laughed because it was a funny question and said no. She took his laughing as proof that he was lying and ordered him to make a new name tag. He said no because it wasn't a swear and he was following the rules. She got so angry she called the head office to prove him wrong and surely get him a detention. The way her face fell when he heard the principal tell her through the phone that it wasn't a swear was priceless. By then, she'd wasted about 20 minutes of class on this one endeavor. She ignored him the rest of the class but didn't skimp out on the nasty glares. Some people are just way too far up into themselves. Story 2. Something like that happened in my school with a substitute teacher asking a burned child to get his mask off. He had several burn scars on his visage and was wearing different masks every day, making it cool stuff. Some with drawings on it, some with matte colors, and some with whiteboard material, making it possible for people to draw on it, just erase it. It was pretty cool. Because it was, quote, distracting and wearing a mask in school shouldn't be allowed no matter the circumstance, unquote. Yeah, so when he started crying because he didn't want to and the sub said he would have to if he wanted to follow her course. One of his friends said, if he can't follow the class with his mask on, I will not either, and walked out of the class with him. Then the whole class walked off too. And then when the word was passed to the whole school, no one in the class that had her showed up at her course. She got fired too. Story 3. I was at a private school that had rules about the length of boys' hair. One guy in particular always ignored the rule, and the administration would tell him to get a haircut every so often, but he never did. Eventually, when his hair got about down to his shoulders, the principal pulled him aside and told him his hair was twice the allowed length, and by next week it needed to be shortened by half. So Monday rolls around and he comes in with half his head shaved and the other side as long as ever. We were impressed by the literal interpretation of the principal's request, but it still ended up with him getting a suspension for a week, and he had to shave the other side before he could come back. Story 4. A buddy of mine was caught messing with his phone during class. Back then, the school rules were that if you were caught, your phone was confiscated for an entire day, and you couldn't get it back until the next day. This was before smartphones, and the rules have changed since the 10 years that I graduated there. So my buddy hands in his phone, but doesn't seem to worry about it. He waits for a couple of classes until lunch break and asks me to come with him. He's going to get his phone back. We go to the staff room where the confiscated phones were held and ask a teacher there if he could copy down a phone number into my phone so he could call his dad later that day. The teacher agrees and gives him the phone. I hand him mine and we wait for him to copy the number. When he's done, he gives me mine back and sticks his own phone in his pocket. He was known as a bit of a joker, so when he jokingly said, "Well, thanks a lot, see ya," the teacher immediately laughs, tells him to stop messing about and to give the phone back. Laughing and joking about being caught, he does. But not really. See, he had a second phone, exact same model, except this one was broken. Wouldn't charge anymore, he said. So when he stuck his good phone in his pocket, it was right next to the broken one. When the teacher made him give back the phone, he just gave him back the broken one. It was the best switcheroo I've ever seen in my time at that school. He was so fluent, so nonchalant about the whole thing. It was amazing to see. Story 5. Halloween costumes were banned at my high school because some idiots like 10 years ago before dressed up and used it as an excuse to hide their faces while they vandalized the school. In my senior year, more than half of the class decided that we would still dress up and march into the school together in the morning. We all knew we would be punished right away, but it didn't matter. I stayed up all night making a suit of armor out of metallic duct tape and cardboard, along with a broomstick horse to ride. The next day, we all gathered in the parking lot and waited for everyone to show up. People went all out, and there were a lot of amazing costumes, and after about 20 minutes of waiting, we started our march. The deans had learned of our plan and were waiting for us right as we entered. They started pulling people aside in groups and taking student ideas to hand out detentions. In my group, there was one guy dressed up as an ATM, and when the dean asked for his ID, he started making ATM noises and then slipped the ID out through the slot where you would put your debit card in. It was one of the funniest things, and I was so jealous that my costume was not as clever as his. Even though having so many of us participate was pretty awesome, his costume just made that whole event for me. Story 6. We had an awful Spanish teacher in middle school who collectively punished the class by making us write the same sentence 100 times over in detention. On one of these occasions, my friend and I asked her if we could type our detention in the computer lab, and this was when computers in schools were a new thing, so we could improve our, quote, typing speed, and she said yes. Anyway, we didn't do much typing, but did learn how to write a basic program that printed the same line 100 times over. Update, because this blew up, we didn't copy-paste because a computer teacher took this as a teachable moment and or an opportunity for malicious compliance, and showed us how to do rudimentary programming instead of cheating our way through it. Also, I'm not sure if copy-paste had been invented yet. Story 7. So when I was in high school, there was a rule implemented that if you showed up late to school, you had to go to the front office to get a detention slip. You would then have to give it to the teacher for that period, who would then mark it down, and you were required to go to lunch detention for that day. I figured out by the third slip that literally no one cared, teachers, security, or students. So when I was subsequently late for the rest of the year, I would take out an old slip that I had from a previous detention, walk through the school, give it to my teacher to mark down, and then take it back to give to the lunch detention supervisor. But I never went to detention because the front office didn't have a record of me being late. I was late no less than 50 times my senior year, only having been reprimanded the initial 3 times. I even told my parents about it after I had graduated, and even they agreed it was dumb and funny. Story 8. When I was in grade 7, our last class of the day, students would always bring in snacks. Our lunch shift was way too early in the day, so by the end of the school day, we'd all be feeling pretty hungry. And we were all told by our teacher that if we didn't have enough to share, we couldn't eat it in the classroom. One day, almost all of us brought in enough food to share, even with the students that didn't bring anything in. We even synchronized the times that we pulled all of our food out. Our teacher was clueless. She had no idea what to tell us. There wasn't any school-wide no food in classrooms rule, so she couldn't run to the principal. Finally, she gave in to our malicious compliance and allowed us to share food for the rest of the period. Story 9. This was prior to smartphones, circa 2002. One of my classmates was a regular class clown. He would buy brownies in the cafeteria, roll them up in his hand so they looked like a convincing piece of poop. He would then do all sorts of antics with his poop. Put it on seats, throw it at people, what have you. Obviously, the school staff caught on and he got in trouble. This guy didn't go quietly, though. He was required to sit alone at lunch for the entire school year. There were months left before summer. The one teacher who made sure his punishment was severe made regular rounds of the lunchroom to maintain order. She would pass his lone seat during her rounds, and one day he made another very convincing pastry-sourced poop and had it ready for her when she passed. The entire lunchroom was watching out of the corner of their eyes while maintaining an alibi conversation with the people close to them. When she passed, he stood up and snuck behind her and slipped the pastry poop in her purse that she was carrying on her shoulder, and he quickly ran back to his seat. The lunchroom burst into laughter, and the teacher had no idea why. Until later, of course, the dude was an artist at rebellion. Story 10. We had vending machines outside the buildings, but due to some asshat vandalizing them, this understandably pissed the school board off. So the machines were put off limits but could not be powered down due to some kind of contractual obligation of constant availability. In an effort to combat that, faculty were posted at the machines during class changes to prevent purchases. But thankfully, no one was posted at the machines during class time. Mind you, this is like the 1997 to 1999 era. We weren't happy, as that was our sole source of caffeine on campus. We decided to heck with that and made purchases during class. I, being the lithe, tiny guy I was conscripted to be the buyer. While the teacher was either out of the room or indisposed, or let's be honest, intentionally distracted, I would collect cash and requests 4 at a time and hop out the emergency escape window that they had opted to not have an alarm on and walk about 20 feet to the soda machine and make my purchases. This went on for some time until the drink companies lambasted the school board for not restocking their dwindling supplies, allegedly as per contract. They put 2 and 2 together and realized that purchases were still being made. Apparently, I was not the only gopher, and lifted the ban on my last year. Story 11. So I went to high school in South Texas, an area in which it almost never snows. For me, this doesn't mean anything, but I have lived in most of the north for my life, so I know what it's like to play in the snow. However, somehow it ended up snowing overnight, and by snow, I mean like what snow looked like in the North Deep and not just thin and watery. These were immensely heavy flakes. We were all sure that they would cancel school because Texas does not have salt machines or snow plows and the roads were super slick. A lot of parents didn't want their kids to go to school because they didn't feel comfortable with a bunch of new high school drivers on ice. Yet, alas, they of course did not cancel school. A little rain knocks out our whole district, but a foot of snow? Nothing. My mother made us take the bus because although she felt comfortable driving in snow being from Illinois, Texas drivers are more aggressive and the roads weren't properly cleared. So I took the bus and it was like being on a safari tour. Kids were taking pictures of the icicles on trees and all wide-eyed. It was funny. Once we got to school though, the campus looked like a war zone. No one would go inside and had instead resorted to snowball fights on the entire campus and parking lots. Once the bell rang, of course, no one went inside. I watched from the window as the vice principal went to the front of the school, commanded the kids inside, and of course getting nailed in his bald head by snowballs. He finally managed to round up the rogue kids and we all went about the first period. I had a relaxed teacher who knew no one would pay attention. Since half the class was missing anyway, she let us act out the Civil War with snowballs and took us outside. While we were playing outside, we all paused as we heard the fire alarm go off. The school came pouring out for the next 2 periods. The dude that pulled the fire alarm is a legend and lives on at our school to this day. He did in fact get arrested, along with another kid that thought it'd be smart to throw ice at a cop. That was the one time I saw the high school completely not have a handle on anyone. Story 12. It's not really a rebellion against the rules, but a good friend of mine had a special talent to make teachers like him, despite having no respect for the actual school system. He used to study on his own to ace the tests, rarely showed up to classes he didn't like, and still got perfect report cards with high praise from all the teachers. The height of it was when he convinced his homeroom teacher to come to pick him up from the beach before an important test. He eventually went on to have a great military career, but if he ever gets into politics, I wouldn't be surprised if he somehow managed to convince everyone that world domination under his rule was their idea. Story 13. So we had this dude, Kyle. His name is not Kyle, but he absolutely had Kyle energy, trademarked. He looked like a typical low-income stoner kid with long hair, ripped clothes and jeans, beat-up shoes, beanies, and socks with weed stuff on them. Now, Kyle was a peculiar kind of kid who spent half his time in detention, rarely ever showed up to tests, and when he did, he would just kind of sleep through them. He was pretty rambunctious and kind of funny, but ultimately was one of the troubled children. He was a quote-unquote low flyer, as the assistant principal called him when we talked, since I was also a low flyer. That meant he got in trouble, but nothing serious like drugs or fighting, though everyone thought or knew he was a pothead. One of my all-time favorite stories of Kyle was in our world history class. The teacher absolutely hated him. They always got into it, and honestly, the man would talk very patronizingly to Kyle, and the dude snapped back. Our teacher said, "Get out, now." Kyle proceeded to go to the other side of the room from the door. When the teacher asked him what he was doing, he yelled, "Getting my backpack and getting out." There were kind of like cubbies for our bags by the windows, so Kyle grabs his packs it up, and straight yeets it out the window. What follows is the teacher yelling, "What are you doing?" and Kyle screaming out, "I'm getting out," followed by him dolphin diving out the window. It was surreal. Kyle was suspended, came back a few weeks later, did some more, was suspended again, came back, and was finally expelled. The dude is seemingly doing okay the last time I Facebooked and stalked him, works at a Chili's now. Here are some more stories about the adventures of Kyle, thusly the Chronicles of Kyle. The kid ate a raw cup of ramen, whole. No, I don't think I explained it properly though. He ate the entire cup of ramen, whole, the styrofoam cup, paper top, the dried noodles, everything. Would sprinkle the packet stuff for seasoning, but everything else he consumed was dry as dirt. He also bit into oranges and bananas like they were apples, peel and skin and all. It was fascinating watching this man deconstruct an entire grapefruit. He once brought a bird to school, not like a parakeet or anything, like a straight-up grackle that is everywhere. He kept it in his shoebox and his beat-up backpack and would ask people, "Hey, want to see Tweety?" and pull out this box covered in leaves, seeds, and bird with the bird in the middle. He was eventually caught by a teacher and told to let it out, and he let it go in the courtyard, but the bird never flew off. He was probably injured or something. This dude was also into parkour, but kind of awkwardly so. We lived in a suburban area surrounded by a lot of country. He'd still manage to climb whatever he could though, like he'd be seen on random people's roofs, would try to jump over people's slowly moving cars in the parking lot, and would climb up trees and jump down to surprise people from out of nowhere. He also, of course, climbed the school tower, and when the admin unlocked the base to climb the 4 flights up to get him, he had already scaled the outside water pipe down again. Kyle was weird, but he wasn't a bully. One time we had this race thing explode when a kid who was kinda bullied exploded at some black guys, calling them N-words and monkeys and etc. Like straight racial epithets to everyone, regardless of who were there, right in the middle of the cafeteria. It was about to be a dog pile when suddenly Kyle straight up splashing water at this dude while yelling, holy water, goddamn boy, you need Jesus." It was so insane that it hesitated everyone long enough for the admin to break everything up and separate the racist kid. Kyle essentially saved the bullied racist kid from getting beat down by causing a bigger scene. God damn it, Kyle, you are a legend. Story 14. I was in a Christian high school at the time, the day before winter break rolls around, and I had packed a few Toblerone chocolate bars and some notes for the teachers I most appreciated, with the intention of leaving them as a Christmas gift. Before school, the principal made a public announcement that students were not to give any teachers any gifts unless we were going to give all teachers the same gift. This was obviously a bit of a problem since I couldn't exactly come back the next day with additional candy bars, so I marched into her office to address this issue. Upon entering the office, I made a show of opening a chocolate bar and breaking off exactly one piece and placing it on her desk. I told her that I was going to give her a full candy bar, but I now had to share her chocolate bar with other teachers that I didn't really care so much about anyways. That rule was quietly lifted. Story 15. During my senior year of high school, 2008, my school got super strict about cell phones. It got to the point that we weren't allowed to have them out at any point in the day, not even during our lunch period. They claimed that we would send each other test answers or something like that. Anyway, a friend of mine who was a year below me was tired of the rule and how rude teachers were when enforcing it. He literally looked at his phone to check the time and got it taken from him for the rest of the day. That next week, he comes to lunch with 2 older, non-functioning flip phones. He takes the first out and pretends that he's talking to someone on it. A teacher is instantly on him. They walk over and hold their hand out for him to give it up. He looks at the teacher and then proceeds to break the flip phone in half and puts it in their hand. The teacher was speechless. She just walked away without saying anything. He takes the second phone out and does the same thing again. The second teacher thought it was pretty funny. Flash forward to 2015 and I start working at the school as a student mentor. And now everyone is allowed to have their phones out pretty much at any time. Wow, how things have changed. Story 16. I remember schools being strict about phones, and whenever mine was taken, which only happened the first few times I used them in classes, my mom would usually ask the teacher what would happen in the case of an emergency if I needed to contact her or vice versa. For the harder ones, she would imply something along the lines of, "And what if it kills my child?" Later giving it back to me and saying, "Don't get caught next time." Just so y'all know though, she is a teacher for the kids who need the most compassion now and has done high school too. Intelligent lady, MIT, whatever. She wasn't just trying to burn the teachers, she was also the one who suggested a workaround in our school system where tardy slips en masse were punished harshly and being absent for a class wasn't, so she suggested if we were late to just not go to that class and go to the next one. Story 17. I have a similar story with strict cell phone usage. The school has no problem with it, but actually encourages technology usage in classroom. If you are distracted by cell phones, then you aren't trying to learn anyways, and it is the teacher's job to teach the students. Banning cell phones won't help. Anyways, we had this one crazy teacher that just went against the school on everything. Even when the school encourages teachers to implement technology into their classrooms, this teacher is still using the whiteboard, taking up half the class writing stuff only for us to write it back down onto our note sheet instead of using a PowerPoint presentation or printouts, or letting us type out our notes and always erases it before we could finish saying we were too slow and he had to move on to cover all the materials. He also takes students' cell phones, even if it's just laying on the desks, on our backpacks, or in our pocket bulges. If he even sees a charging cable, he would ask for our phone. Since I have about 20-ish smartphones at home, different story, I brought some of them in along with my 2 laptops, 1 netbook, and 2 tablets to his class. I took notes on my laptop, and as he took that away, I pulled out my other laptop, then my netbook, tablets, and 3 cell phones before he sent me to the principal's office. The principal thought it was pretty funny and walked me back to the classroom and asked for all my stuff back. I was moved out of that class and avoided him for the rest of the year. Story 18. Here we go. So in high school, I did the morning announcement with 2 other guys in front of a green screen every Friday on camera. We chose the background. We were given a lot of leniencies because this was in the early 2000s when technology was a little more simple. In the AV room, we controlled every TV in the high school of over 1,000 kids. When Christmas was close, we were told, don't do anything Xmas related because not everyone celebrates it. So the last announcement before the holidays, the screen comes on and in the background there's a sleigh ride video and the 3 of us pop up and yell, "Merry Christmas!" as loud as we can and dressed in Christmas costumes. Now again, the school cannot turn this off, only we can. It's just so happened that the superintendent was in the building that day, saw the video, and freaked out. It turned into this whole ordeal and we were almost suspended for 3 days. They stopped letting us do the announcements until there was a petition signed by the school to let us do it again because we were actually pretty funny and most of the gags we pulled were innocent, like eating cream corn out of the can in less than 10 seconds if enough cans were donated to the food drive. When they let us come back, they said we couldn't make jokes and we had to have a neutral background, so we went forward with our plan. When the announcements turned on for the first time since our near suspension, we had no background, just a green screen. I and the other guys just wore white t-shirts. We read the announcement without as much winking, minus the occasional moan. It would be like, today for lunch the school is serving, pizza, serving pizza. At first it was minimal, but at the end of it sounded like we were having a mini orgy. We read the last announcement, said goodbye, and then started acting like the announcements were over and like we didn't know we were on camera. We stood up in our boxer shorts and walked off camera. After about 10 seconds, our buddy Scott stood up from under the table, wiped his lips off, took a big swallow, and walked off of the camera. That time, we were suspended.
What rules were created because of you? Story 1. When I was in middle school, students would wear pajama pants because they weren't against the rules and they didn't really cause any problems, until I decided to try it. At the time, my favorite pair of pajama pants were leopard print silk, but there was also a matching top, long sleeve, button-up. I decided, what the heck, I'll wear that too. And then, just to complete the look, I grabbed those little flimsy pair of after-procedure flip-flops my mom had on hand, and wore those too because they were also leopard print. Everything was a few sizes too big because they were actually all belonged to my mom, and I looked fabulous. I spent all day shuffling awkwardly around in my garish outfit, and the next day the teachers announced that pajamas were no longer allowed at school. Story 2. Not me, but the Intro to Engineering class at UCF has a competition where groups must create a self-powered boat to race an orange around the circumference of the reflection pond. The pond is maybe 100 feet in diameter. One year, one group used a lawnmower engine to power their boat, and the same year a group used bottle rockets. Upon starting the race, the lawnmower group's boat tipped over in the middle and poured gasoline into the pond. At the same time, the other group lit their bottle rockets, which promptly ignited all the spilled gasoline and set the pond on fire. They created a new rule after that year: no gasoline-powered boats. Story 3. At some summer thing Texas A&M did to try and attract students, I didn't end up going there, there was a little mini engineering contest where you had to construct a 4-wheeled vehicle that would go the farthest. Using an assortment of MacGyverish materials, including a balloon, some tape, a mousetrap, paper clips, tacks, and things like that, and like 4 Lego wheels and 2 axles. My group argued for a while, and honestly, we wouldn't have had anywhere near the best contraption if not for my last-minute inspiration of the rule loophole exploitation, which apparently I'm better at than actual engineering. No one said all 4 wheels couldn't be on the same axle, and there was no strict definition of vehicle. 4 Lego wheels on 1 axle flung by the mousetrap 25 feet, beat second place by almost double, I think. Our team won TI-89s each. That's not rule breaking, that's just damn good engineering. Story 4. I have no way of proving it, but I think McDonald's and Best Buy changed the terms of 2007 McDonald's Monopoly promotion because of me. From 2004 through 2007, and possibly after that, McDonald's partnered with Best Buy to include Best Buy Bucks in conjunction with the popular McDonald's Monopoly peel-off game pieces. Best Buy Bucks were part of the game piece attached to the sandwich in a value meal, or if you purchased large fries, they would be attached to the large fries as well. Every Best Buy Bucks game piece was a coupon with a value of $1. I found out you could write in self-addressed stamped envelopes, SASE, for game pieces, so I tried this in 2004, writing 30 SASEs. Each SASE returned 4 McDonald's Monopoly peel-off game pieces and 1 Best Buy Bucks coupon. In 2005, the promotion was basically the same, so I scaled up my efforts and I wrote about 150 envelopes. In 2006, the promotion again remained basically the same, except there was one change that drastically improved the return. 1 in 3 game pieces had a value of $3. In other words, every Best Buy Bucks game piece had an expected value of $1.66 repeating. But also, as it turned out, you could redeem the coupon online and in-store, raising the EV to $3.33 per game piece. So I figured out my costs. Each SASE took about 3 minutes to fully prepare and cost 37 cents times 2 equals 74 cents in round-trip postage, plus the cost of the envelopes, approximately 3 cents, for a net gain of $2.56 in Best Buy store credit. For every 77 cents invested, approximately a 232% gain. Effectively, it offered a 57% discount below retail, plus sales tax was only applied to the cash balance of the purchase. I did what anyone in college would do with this information. I recruited an army of friends and offered them $10 an hour to write SASEs. Also, I bought a P.O. box for 6 months in a town in Vermont. A 30-minute drive, because there was a provision in the rules that Vermont residents may omit return postage. So paying for someone to fill out the envelopes added about 50 cents per SASE to my cost, but I saved 37 cents per SASE with the P.O. box. The P.O. box cost about 36 cents for the 6 months, also plus gas, etc. But in the end, the plan totally worked. My friends were happy to get some easy spare cash, and McDonald's complied with the rules of their game and fulfilled about 4,400 game piece requests. I wrote the most SASEs, but I still laid about $5,000 in expenses. Much of it financed thanks to a friend and acquaintances who knew that I was dead serious. The people at the post office were pretty pissed and demanded that I upgrade my P.O. box to receive mail at that volume. I told them, I'm sorry, it will never happen again, and they let it slide. They were all envelopes, so if you've ever seen how the Postal Service bulks envelopes in those long Coroplast trays, try to imagine tens of those trays. I did return them to the post office eventually. We received just under $15,000 in Best Buy bucks. We got lucky and ran above EV. We received no low, mid, nor high-level collect or win or instant prizes. We received an ungodly amount of food prize coupons, which we gave mostly to my friends, although many expired unused. However, if I recall correctly, we did win 1 or 2 $5 or $10 McDonald's gift certificates as well. Best Buy, surprisingly, had no qualms about accepting the coupons in the increments of $600 at a time in the store, and $50 online as per the terms. The first visit was a bit unusual. The manager demanded I provided ID. I said, that's fine, I'm sure they'll be able to verify these are my game pieces. I bought tons of awesome shit. The next year, the Best Buy Bucks promotion wasn't a part of McDonald's Monopoly. And obviously, although I'm sure both companies fulfilled many more requests than just from me, they never expected such an organized, determined response, and promptly addressed the rules to ensure that they could not be taken advantage of again. Clearly, Best Buy Bucks were meant, as many coupons are, to draw consumers into a purchase. When a single consumer or a group of consumers exploits those coupons according to the terms of the offer, resulting in a $15,000 electronics giveaway, I'm sure they noticed. I sold a large amount of the coupons and purchased electronics at a slight margin just to liquidate them and cover my loans. However, I kept spending thousands of dollars in free electronics that I'd earned just by writing SASEs and playing McDonald's Monopoly. Life is as cruel as it is to consumer electronics. Most of the stuff I kept is either broken or obsolete now. Also, I lost a ton of stuff in a fire recently. It actually eased me to know that so many of the electronics I'd lost, I'd never actually bought in the first place. I thought I will only remember those things when I tell the story now. Story 5. When I was 7 to 9 years old, my friend and I did nothing but play outside all day and built all sorts of wooden forts and tree houses. We got pretty handy with our tools and our projects got bigger and bigger. One day, we found 4 good-sized trees about 6 feet apart from each other in a rough square just a stone's throw away from a neighborhood park. We decided to build the mother of all forts by making a platform in the middle of those trees about 6 feet off the ground. It had 2 feet of walls around the sides and a sturdy ladder, and eventually a second level above the first. This was a fairly small neighborhood, and everyone knew everyone else. So all the grown-ups with kids came to check it out. After a few modifications, it was deemed safe enough, and for a few weeks, all the neighborhood's kids would play in it and around it. We felt like kings. Then one day we came home from school and it was absolutely destroyed. Apparently the county caught wind of it in its proximity to the playground and sent some guys out with chainsaws to demolish it. We were heartbroken. They told our parents that from then on we weren't allowed to build anything anymore, because the county could maybe be held liable in case someone got hurt. We gathered up our scraps, said "F the police," and moved further into the woods and out of sight and built an even better one and several backups just in case. In hindsight, I'm 30 now, I can understand why it needed to be done, but all those years ago it seemed like the greatest tragedy ever. Story 6. My story is not one of badassery, but rather an example of thinking outside the box. In my high school physics class, we had fun doing the Physics Olympics after AP tests were done and our lesson plan was complete. One of the events was seeing how many paper clips you could remove from a bin by using 2 AA batteries, copper wire, 2 nails, and a tube. The logic was to make an electromagnet, but after reading the rules and talking with the teacher, nowhere did it explicitly say that you had to make an electromagnet. I proceeded to make a shovel using the batteries as the handle, the nails as support for the wire, and tape bucket, and I reinforced it all with tape. My group got the all-time record for that event, with around 1,150 paper clips picked up in 30 seconds. We picked up over 900 more than the closest competitor. Needless to say, the rules explicitly stated that we had to make an electromagnet now, but no one will touch my group's record. Story 7. First year of university, my friend bought a sofa and an armchair from eBay for $99, including delivery. Best purchase ever. He managed to fit both of them in his tiny room. Once the university found out, they didn't like it, so they told him to get rid of them. He said no, and he managed to keep them until the end of the year. He put them in storage, and the following September, he brought them into his new, even smaller room. Only the sofa fits, so I got the armchair. Again, the university didn't like it. They sent us both very official letters giving us 30 days to remove the furniture. We printed off the entire residency agreement and read it page by page, every word, to see if there was anything forbidding us from having them. There wasn't. They had their fire tags, they didn't block any exits, and the only possible problem was if it interfered with the cleaner's job. We asked her, and she was fine with it. Our rooms were the last on the rotation, so she'd sometimes sit and talk with us after she was finished. Anyway, so after 30 days, we got another letter saying that they knew we still had the furniture and we would be fined. We printed off all the documentation we needed, suited up, and went to the office to argue our case. After several months, they managed to convince the cleaner to say the furniture interfered, so we actually had to get rid of them. Our friend took them to his house. The following year, we weren't in university halls anymore, but we checked the residency documentation on their website when we noticed the guidelines for furniture were now much more specific about what you could and couldn't have in your room. 4 years later, he still has those sofas. Hey guys, are you enjoying the video? If so, please like and subscribe. It really means a lot and helps the channel. Anyway, back to the stories. Story 8. I don't know for certain, but I feel pretty confident that I had the flow of traffic at a certain intersection in town changed. There was a very wide shoulder on the road that I used as a right turning lane, only to get pulled over by a policeman for passing about 5 cars on the shoulder while they waited for the traffic signal. I countered the idea to him that the shoulder there was an actual lane. There was a dividing line and it was nicely paved. No reason for us not to use this space for making right turns, although no one used it. I really was passing traffic on the shoulder, but being very cautious. About 3 months later, the intersection is repainted with a shoulder as well as a right turn only lane. It felt great, seeing as it does help traffic flow better at that crowded intersection. Story 9. When I was about 5 or 6, I saw my cousin playing with an electric roller door and I thought I'd try it too. A couple of weeks later, I was playing with it by myself. The idea was to hang onto it as it went up and then drop off at the top. After this, I'd put the door down by climbing onto my bike and hitting the wall-mounted button. At some point, I put my finger in the locking hole on the slide rail to help myself down as the door was coming down. The door crushed 2 knuckles and almost guillotines my finger off. Story 10. It wasn't me, but a guy I met. He had a gym class and the locker rooms were attached to the pool. So one day after the gym, everybody is showering and he decided to slip into the pool. A guy held the door open and everyone else sprayed shampoo and soap on the floor. And this guy goes like a penguin into the pool butt naked. He slides in, lands in the pool, and comes and goes, "Aw yeah," until he notices that there is an old person's water aerobics class going on in there. When he visited the school years later, there was a wall built that you have to go around to get in the pool with his name on it. Story 11. When I was in high school, my school adopted a uniform policy my senior year that required us all to wear one of 3 colored polos and a pair of khaki pants/shorts. In the wintertime, it would get quite cold in the school, and the only long-sleeve fleece we could wear was $80 and a piece of that didn't even come close to keeping you warm. I refused to buy one and then had the brilliant idea. I was going to bring a blanket to school. I looked through the entire school policy handbook and I couldn't find anything telling me that I couldn't do it, so for the entire winter, I would just go and wrap myself in a blanket while in class. I then graduated that year and went back to visit for Christmas break, where I was told that because of me, they had added blankets to the unacceptable attire portion of the school handbook. Story 12. At my high school, nobody ever put locks on their lockers, private school with no problem with theft at all. So a group of seniors decided to pull a prank by throwing everyone's books and notes all over the floor and in the ceiling. So they changed the school policy so that locks were required and seniors didn't get to graduate until the end of the school year. So our school decided that our locks had to be bought through the school store for like $12. They all had the exact same keyhole in the back so the vice principal could open your locker if necessary. The dumb part was, these were locks we bought to keep, so I took mine apart and reverse engineered a key from the key mechanism. I made myself a key that opened everyone's locks on their locker. The school also had locks on empty lockers, so I stole some of those over time and took them apart, and put them back together so that they would only need to be turned to one number to be opened. Many students hated having to use a lock. Anyway, I ended up getting suspended about halfway through my senior year. They thought I stole a key somehow, but they soon realized I didn't break any rules by having it because I made it from a lock I bought with my own money. They ended up suspending me for a week for vandalism, stealing locks. The whole ordeal made me famous among students and faculty, and I loved all the attention I got when I came back. My parents were never pissed at me. They were extremely angry at the school for how they treated me. I could go into so much detail, and this was the graduation card that they gave me. The school ended up adding rules about security and locks because of the whole ordeal. Story 13. During my sophomore year in high school, I pocketed one of the keys to our high school that I found on a counter in the main office. The school only had like 3 different kinds of locks, so the one key that I stole happened to unlock the exterior doors and most of the classroom doors as well. I didn't use it much, just unlocked a few shortcuts here and there. Nothing crazy. It was fun to have though. But then senior year came and we started talking about what to do for a senior prank. I got involved and told people that I had this and how much power it gave us. I soon led a group of about 50 students in planning this large-scale epic prank that we did the night after graduation. We went to the school at 2 a.m. and just caused mass chaos. We didn't break or steal anything, but just caused madness everywhere. Like moving every trash can into one room, putting alarm clocks into the ceiling panels of all the classrooms and having them all set for the same time the next day, moving a teacher's desk to another room down the hall and putting someone else's desk in its place, etc., etc. Anyway, the prank was quite successful, and school the next day was total chaos for the first 4 hours. The administration was not happy, and they realized that the students had a key and the bricks were shat. They ended up replacing every single lock in the school, changed external doors to use electronic locks with key cards, installed alarm systems, and put cameras in all the main hallways. The cost was astronomical, something like $100,000 in security renovations. Since this was outside the regular budget, they had to put in a referendum for a public vote to authorize spending $100,000 in emergency funding for the added security. The measure passed that summer. Story 14. So you guys ever heard of the McDonald's Make It Bacon promotion? Where you could add bacon to anything for $1? Yeah, it didn't last long. My friend walked up and ordered a Big Mac meal with bacon. He clarified to the confused employee he wanted his burger with bacon, and he wanted his fries to come with bacon, and yes, he wanted his Coke to come with bacon. Perplexed, the poor burger flipper complied, and soon his bacon-adorned meal arrived. The employees watched as he ate quickly, but this was not enough. He went back and ordered ice cream with bacon. They balked, and the frontline workers retreated to confer with the manager. They arrived not long after to inform my friend that they would not, in fact, give him bacon on his ice cream, but would be able to give him ice cream and bacon. He agreed. Soon enough, a tray slid across the counter, a piece of bacon and ice cream. He took them both up, placed the bacon on the ice cream, looked at the manager in the eye, and took a big bite. The next day, all of the banners were gone, and the promotion ended. Story 15. When I was in 3rd grade, my class had a rule that everyone had to put their chairs on top of their desks at the end of the day to make the janitor's life a little easier. If you didn't put your chair on top of your desk and another student who stayed after class to do this did it for you, then you owed him like 5 kid bucks, a currency that was exclusive to the class. You earned them by reading books, doing your homework, answering questions during discussions, etc. Unfortunately for everyone else, a group of friends and I lived within walking distance of the school, meaning that we had time to hang out while all the other bus kids had to rush so they didn't miss their ride home. We had a lucrative business of just hanging out after class, putting people's chairs on their desks, and collecting the next day. We had a 5-ish minute window where we had to just sit and wait to make sure that no one would come back to put their chairs up. Being the 3rd grader I'm 20 now, I thought the words boob, boobies, jugs, melons, etc. were hilarious. My friends and I had this genius idea to go to a computer and type in boobs.com and see what would pop up. We were pleasantly surprised as a large-breasted woman appeared. We tried giantmelons.com, hugeboobs.com, etc. This went on for a couple of weeks. Everyone would leave and we would type in boobs.com, giggle for a few minutes, and then put off the chairs and leave. One day, the teacher called us out to the hallway to talk. She begins with, "Do you all know what pornography is?" As a 3rd grader who is decently sheltered at home, I had no idea. One of my friends, on the other hand, starts to giggle and say yes. The teacher explains that it is bad and someone had been searching for pornography on the school's computers. We didn't know how to clear the history yet, and the incognito windows didn't exist for our use, especially with Netscape. Later in the day, she announces to the class that the chair rule is now gone and she would do it herself. I thought that was the end of it, but sadly, when we tried to go to boobs.com on a school computer later that week, we were met with a page saying this is against school policy. No more boobs.com? We figured out ways around it, but soon all porn was blocked.
People of Reddit, what stupid rule at your work or school backfired beautifully? Story 1. Not sure if this one applies, but I worked at a restaurant that started doing Thursday night trivia in hopes of getting more traffic. The prize for the winner was their ticket would get comped. One guy asked to have everyone's in the restaurant food put on his ticket and then won. They stopped doing trivia night. Rather stupid to stop it, just add a dollar limit. Story 2. I was working as a medical assistant at a private practice medical clinic. Our clinic manager wouldn't allow the new receptionist to drive to the bank to deposit cash, made her walk carrying the money bag so that she couldn't drive away with the money. Bizarre, I know. That went on for a few weeks. Then the receptionist was mugged and over $1,000 in cash was stolen. She was allowed to drive after that. I tried to deposit cash for sailing team members' dues at my university treasury office. Sorry, we can't take that large of a deposit. Why not? It's not safe for students to be carrying around that much cash. Can you make me safer and take my deposit? They took my deposit. Story 3. Not a stupid rule, but I think this should apply. I'm in aviation maintenance and wanted to leave the current company where I worked for 12 years with. During my interview at the new company, I was asked why I was thinking of leaving my current job, being that it was a good and reputable company. I said new management is all about efficiency and not the one thing aviation maintenance is all about, safety. The interviewer liked my interview and assured me their company doesn't cut any corners in safety versus cost. I get the job, and fast forward 6 months or so, I'm the new guy, so I get the short end and have to work Christmas Eve. Should be a short day. Boss's plane is coming in from Cabo to drop off chartered passengers, fill up on fuel, and take him and his family to their vacation home in Aspen. The plane arrives, and as I'm doing my post-flight walk-around, I see a big problem that forces me to ground the plane. Boss is clearly not happy and attempts to force me to make an unapproved repair. I deny doing so, and I'm sent home. Sweet. I didn't quit, it's documented, and I get to go home earlier than planned on a holiday. Someone else gets called in to do the Mickey Mouse of a repair, and everyone's happy. Plane taxis out with owner and family full of fuel and tries to take off. Oops. Crappy repair failed, a huge component breaks off and goes into the inlet of the jet engine, grenades that engine, plane's brakes overheat trying to stop the heavy-ass plane with just one engine, some fuselage is damaged from the engine that gave out, and the plane finally comes to a stop. The FAA comes in. Sweet. Who made this repair? Who accepted to take this flight? What company operates this way? So the dummy tech that tried to make the repair gets his license revoked. The boss owns the charter company, so he's fined a huge amount and is put on probation with continuous FAA audits, and best of all, the insurance rejected his claim to the engine because it was negligence. This cost him millions, and they couldn't fire me. I get to tell the story over and over and over with a big smile on my face. Story 4. My spouse's workplace realized they didn't have a policy about sending sexual images or jokes as part of their email acceptable use policy, so they added it. Except they made it a firing offense to send or receive sexual content. I think the intent was to stop people from subscribing to such content. They also said that your access would be immediately revoked until a determination was made. So someone got fired for something else and decided to send their whole management chain a graphically sexual image, then report it using the anonymous tip line. IT got the report, concluded they did indeed receive sexual content, and did as required. Suspended all the involved email accounts, including the senior vice presidents. The policy has since been reworded. There are burning bridges, and then there's drying up the lake just to fill it with gasoline. Damn. Story 5. Not mine, but an old roommate of mine was a senior developer for a small company. It was an open secret that one of the other senior devs, a guy who had been there since the beginning, would sometimes spend time looking at plastic surgery photos, before and after shots, photos of active procedures, etc. He did it enough that people would poke fun at him about it, but he didn't seem embarrassed about it and it wasn't harming anyone. Well, one day a project manager said something to the CEO about this guy's ongoing plastic surgery obsession, and the CEO flipped. He said that going forward, no one was allowed to use their work computers to access external websites at all. Anyone who's ever been a developer knows that half the job is Googling stuff, so this policy pretty much halted productivity in its tracks. It only lasted a day before the CEO retracted the rule, but let everyone know that their browser history would be monitored going forward. After that, no one really changed their behavior, they just started remotely accessing their home computers to browse instead. Yes, I am going to outsmart computer programmers about how to use their time on the computers more effectively. I am very smart. Story 6. A place I used to work had a rule that executive-level staff needed to be contactable when on leave, so they had a section on the leave form for the address of where you'd be staying and a contact number. Some knuckle shuffler in HR decided it applied to all staff and the shenanigans began. People would put down the address and phone numbers of sex shops, sports grounds, and medical clinics. I gave the latitude and longitude of the place I was going camping and the UHF frequency channel my radio would be tuned to. My company used to be a small startup. In my first year, I was a project manager and architect for a global system rollout. I put in my vacation days for Burning Man 6 months out, in February, and my personal time off was approved. Then a few months later, around June, my boss, who had been the head of the IT department, got a new boss, new head of IT. With a month to go until Burning Man, the new head of IT told me that my project rollout was too important for me to be uncontactable at all and that I would need to take a satellite phone to Burning Man, or my vacation would be canceled. We were still 3 months from going live, but he decided that we were at a critical moment that I had to be available. However, neither my boss nor the new head of IT wanted to carry out the daily $18 per minute satellite phone calls with me, probably because they knew it was violating some labor law. So they got one of the guys in the London office to call me in the Black Rock Desert each day. I said I wouldn't take the calls before 1 p.m., which was 9 p.m. for our man in London. Every day he called, he had a few beers, and didn't give a crap about project updates. He just wanted to know what parties I'd been to and what art I'd seen. Story 7. Late 80s, high school, the rule was no shorts. A classmate came for an exam with basketball shorts on that were below her knees. The teacher made her go home to change. She came back in a micro miniskirt and wrote her exam. My high school principal was known for sending girls home to change if their bra straps were showing. In my sophomore year, he tried to send one of my classmates home, but she was like, "Nah, I've got a change of clothes, no need to send me home." So she went to the bathroom, took her bra off, and made a show of putting it into her locker. The principal was pissed, but couldn't do anything about it since he technically was following the dress code. It became a thing, like for hundreds of high school girls removing their bras at school or just show up braless as a big screw you to the principal. Story 8. Back in 2011, a company I worked for had the bright idea to block all social networks because, employees should be working instead of slacking off on Facebook. I could write volumes of books on the toxic culture in that place, but the owner/president, who lived in a different country and visited about once every few months, was universally feared by everyone, and a few days before his arrival, the whole building went into panic mode. So a few weeks after the whole social network ban, His Royal Highness shows up, and 5 minutes later, half of the IT department is scrambling to his office. Apparently, there was an issue with the Wi-Fi, or at least that's what he figured since he couldn't log on to Facebook. It was fixed in seconds. A few years and 3 promotions later, I make a joke about it with him. Instead of a laugh, I get a confused look. Turns out he still thinks it was some internet problem since whoever decided to ban social networks didn't have the balls to tell him about it after the incident. Facebook, Twitter, and LinkedIn were all blocked by IT at my company a few months ago after some other massive IT issues. Now it makes it really hard for my department, marketing, to do anything. My boss has to fire up the hotspot on his phone and do things with his laptop if he wants anything posted on social media. Story 9. I am the one who lives closest to work, so if the building alarm goes off overnight, I'm first on the list to get the call from the alarm company. It used to be that if we had good reason to believe the alarm was not an actual break-in, we could tell them not to summon the police and ignore the alarm. I can access the building cameras from home. The most common alarm was the cleaning crew who were always messing up the disarming. Then a sister site ignored an alarm that turned out to be an actual break-in, and the facilities director decided that no matter what, if there was an alarm, we should have the alarm company summon the police, then go to the building, get the police all clear, and reset the alarm. This was a pain in the ass, but rare enough, and I lived literally 2 minutes away. Then we contracted for the alarm company to come in and replace all of our panels and sensors. It was a nightmare process that ultimately ended up taking months, and the whole time there were phantom alarms, sometimes multiple times a night. Each time I had to go out in the middle of the night, I'd prepare the required reports, send it to the facilities director, and request to go back to the old process. Each time he said no, we couldn't afford to miss a potential real break-in. After about 3 weeks of this nonsense, I was due for some time off. I was going out of town, and the protocol for that was for me to ignore calls from the alarm company so they moved to the next person on the list, which happened to be the facilities director. In the 5 days I was off, I must have ignored at least 4 overnight calls that all would have gone to him next. Then, suddenly, nothing. When I got back, I was informed that for the duration of the alarm update, we just weren't going to arm the building at all. So much for can't afford to risk a break-in. Story 10. My old workplace had a control freak bean counter. At one point, she decided that any purchase of equipment must come with documentation showing that we had searched around the internet and proved we got the best deal. Honestly, it was unenforceable, so our supervisor just told us to ignore it and that he'll deal with the backlash. So one day I had to buy some tools for the workshop, and I happened to come across a bunch of coolers on sale. It just happened that we needed coolers to transport stuff, so I bought one. I brought it back, we measured it, and found it was the perfect size for what we had planned. Turns out that time the bean counter was watching us. She came strolling into my supervisor's office with a printout from Amazon and the boss in town saying that she had found a similar cooler for cheaper. So my supervisor takes a look at the printout. So, you found a cooler that's $2 cheaper. Yes. How much time did you spend looking this up? Just 1 hour of work. And you think Rum should have spent 1 hour of his workday shopping for coolers? Yes. You do realize we pay Rum $17 an hour? We need 3 coolers. Right now, he grabbed those coolers while out on a supply run, and you'd rather have him spend 1 hour of his day at $17 an hour to save $6? And while we're at it, the supervisor pulls out a broken vice grip from under his desk. This is the cheapo brand vice grip you approve. Now, this is fine for your regular at-home needs, but we're a workshop and need some quality stuff. We have been using a Good Stuff brand vice for 3 years. Cheapo lasted 6 months. Do the math. Story 11. The bottom floor of my secondary school was a square that had a corridor all the way around. After some incident where a kid got knocked over, they implemented a one-way system. Unfortunately, they were very strict about enforcing it. If you accidentally walked past your class, you couldn't just turn around. They seemed very proud of their new rule until everyone started showing up late for class because they had to do extra laps at the bottom floor. Story 12. Couldn't buy drinks at lunch with cash money, had to buy some voucher. They were just cheaply made laminated pieces of paper. This was 2001, I was 13 and bored. I scanned the vouchers and printed them out on paper that kinda matched the color of the vouchers and laminated them myself. They were horribly made and not even the right color on the back side, also crudely cut out. I made about 100 of them, then passed them out after I tried paying with them for myself and encountered no problems. Made some new friends and upped production. Took them about 3 weeks to find out by then, but the fake ones had intermingled with the real ones and had already been resold to students via the student office. About half of the vouchers sold were fakes. Drinks were cash only from then on. They had no choice but to accept the fake one for a little while longer though, as they had sold and charged for some of them. Story 13. Required every employee to use electronic time clocks to punch in and out for work, including lunch. Punching in late or leaving early would cause your pay to be docked and get a discipline letter. Multiple people wanted to sabotage the clocks, cut the cords, etc., but wiser heads prevailed. Everyone arrived several minutes early and left late every single day to avoid getting into trouble. Unfortunately, this created unimpeachable evidence of hours worked. The employer had to pay out thousands of dollars in overtime the first month. The clocks disappeared exactly 5 weeks after they were installed with no notification. I worked in a call center and we had a similar clock system, except we were allowed to arrive 5 minutes early and then get on the phones at their scheduled time. One girl figured out that they would pay for those 5 minutes, so she started clocking in earlier and earlier until she was arriving an hour early and sat around for an hour every day. 5 extra hours of overtime every week for close to a year or more until she quit, with no one in management ever catching wind of it. Story 14. I worked at a language teaching center where the lessons are pre-planned by the curriculum, and on weekdays we often only have 2 or 3 hours of classes sporadically spread out through the afternoon and evening. The management was pretty chill when I started, and people just planned their lessons in bulk, which basically entailed checking your schedule and printing out the required unit and session worksheets, and just showed up 10 minutes before to deliver the lesson. On weekends, we'd have full 10-hour workdays. Apart from that, we'd have the odd training session or faculty meeting, but otherwise, you could basically go home or go do whatever you wanted between lessons. All the provided apartments were within 10 minutes walking distance of the center, so this was pretty ideal. The nice managers left, and the new management was crap, who started scheduling mandatory office hours where we had to be in the center with absolutely nothing to do. There'd be a 12 o'clock staff meeting, and my next lesson would be at 4 or 6 p.m., and then 3.5 useless office hours in the middle. When we asked them what we should do, they said, think about your teaching methods. Basically, crappy dick waving. A bunch of the other teachers started watching movies on the projectors in the spare classrooms. I brought in my Switch, and some people would go straight up go nap on the beanbags in the reading nook. The thing was, there was literally no busy work they could generate, and soon it was apparent to everyone, especially prospective new students and parents, how unprofessional and awful it made the center look. The managers embarrassingly just stopped scheduling and enforcing these office hours. Story 15. Now this was before I was hired, but still epic. In the medical setting, scrubs were standard attire. The previous manager instituted a policy banning quote-unquote leisure shoes and requiring pantyhose and makeup for nurses and therapists, and mandating sport coats and ties for doctors, but she failed to distinguish between genders. On day one, all of the nurses and therapists, roughly 40% of whom were male, showed up in full face makeup and dressy shoes, including a couple of brave guys who wore low heels, and all of the doctors, a pretty even 50-50 gender split, showed up in sport coats and ties. The policy was immediately rescinded, and that manager resigned not long after. Story 16. I worked at Starbucks for like 5+ years before and during undergrad, and at one point our district manager thought it was a good idea to implement a just say yes policy, where we literally weren't allowed to tell the customer no. Lasted for about 3 months, and in that 3 months our unaccounted product and waste went up over 300% because when the piece of crap didn't have a way to punch in a customer request, we just had to do it anyways. We always got complaints from stores in surrounding districts because they had angry customers who were requesting things that were against the local food service code and told them that we did it for them at our store. I knew exactly how that policy was going to play out, and I just laughed every time management was freaking out about the problems it was causing. Give me all the money in the cash register and make me a free iced coffee. Yes. Story 17. The grocery store I work at now required to charge 5 cents for plastic bags. Because of this, we have a lot of customers requesting paper bags. Since our paper bags suck ass, we typically double bag so they don't rip up. Well, one day the store manager sees a cashier doubling paper bags and yells at them because paper bags are more expensive and we can't afford to double bag them, so now we have a new rule that you don't double paper bags unless they're really heavy. Fast forward a couple of weeks and my bagger is using single paper bags. Right as the store manager walks by, the bagger picks up one of the bags that wasn't even that heavy and it rips right open, right in front of the manager. We're allowed to double bag them now. Story 18. Every shift, there's a quota we need to fulfill, and then, even if you do fulfill it, you have to keep working until your 8 hours are up. Cue everyone speeding for 4 hours, having a 3-hour lunch and coffee break, then slowly moving their ass for an hour. No rule about us taking necessary breaks if we're still capable of reaching the quota. Now we're allowed to stop once we're done. Story 19. My high school had a smoking in the bathroom problem, and to solve it, rather than having a teacher outside the restrooms during hall time, they locked all the bathrooms except one. This made it so you had to wait in a stupid long line with 1,200 other students trying to use 3 stalls for each gender in the 10 minutes between classes. During class time, they had the assistant principal sit outside the open bathroom and they would check your ID and sign you in and out, and only one student in at a time. Major health code violation. Kids would be holding it all day. Girls, on their cycle, needed the restroom and would often have to get a pass from class to go use the restroom because the lines were too long during breaks. Smokers still smoked in the gym locker rooms during changing times. This rule didn't solve anything but made it very unhygienic and rather annoying to just use the restroom. Story 20. Back in 2014, our HR made a rule people couldn't go to other buildings. We had 3 buildings within a block of each other. All 3 had shipping areas and the warehouse employees had to go to each building to work. But we were told to stay in one building. I mentioned we ship out of all 3, so who's going to do the work? The genius said, "Oh, it'll be taken care of." The next day, $500,000 shipment didn't go out. The following day, we have a meeting. "Why didn't you ship this?" 2 days ago, we were told to stay in our building and someone would take care of it." The rule was quickly changed. Story 21. Students used to smoke in the toilets, so the headmaster decided to lock all male toilets except one, 5 places in one. Now, my school had around 700 students, out of which around 300 were male. Everyone realized that it became impossible to go to the toilet quickly. Result? Some guys went in one and pissed, defecated in all the trash cans. A lot. No one found them, but all the other toilets opened up immediately. Story 22. This one is great. We had a no dating at work rule, then the director started seeing someone and other people had their hidden relationships as well. That rule was nullified when the director announced his engagement, and so about 6 other couples came out. We no longer have that rule, however, people are to let the admin know of relationships now. Story 23. The private school where I used to work hired a second deputy head, whose main function seemed to be creating rules and policies without stopping to consider whether they were actually needed. Their piece de resistance was to give all the students little laminated cards advising them that if they were being harassed, for some reason this person always pronounced the word as harassed, they were supposed to tell their tormentor, "I've had enough, I want you to stop doing and saying that." The students and all their mid to late teens reacted predictably. Most of the cards were soon spotted floating in the river that ran through the village where the school was located, and the phrase, "I've had enough, I want you to stop doing and saying that," was used frequently by students to whichever member of staff asked them to comb their hair or make their bed or settle down and work. I do remember asking one of the school's star rugby players whether the phrase had ever been used the way it had been intended, and his response was, "Yeah, but I kicked the guy in the balls while I said it." Story 24. When COVID started, our boss demanded that our entire team sit in on a group Zoom calls, even if the topics on the agenda didn't have anything to do with their roles. She felt it would build team unity. Productivity dropped, and negative Google reviews came in, and staff became more stressed. When she demanded answers on the next Zoom call, one of my coworkers bluntly said, "Well, I would reply to this woman's voicemail, but I'm stuck on this Zoom call." Story 25. Zero tolerance ended shortly after a bully got thrown through a window because if I'm getting suspended for defending myself, I'm gonna make it worth my while.